Welcome to KOCT's Roundtable. In this edition, we're going to get a glimpse of what's happening at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow through the eyes of our California State Representative, Tasha Boerner Horvath. Now, California has its own experience of climate change. Sea level rise is threatening our coastal cities. Our beaches are shrinking. We have devastating wildfires. Our forests are dying, and we know that water is increasingly in short supply. Assemblymember Boerner Horvath represents the 76th Assembly District, and that includes Encinitas, Carlsbad, Oceanside, and parts of Vista and Camp Pendleton. She's part of a delegation of about 20 people who have traveled to Scotland for the conference from the state of California. Assemblymember Tasha Boerner Horvath, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to join you, Allison.
So now we've just heard news that there have been some pretty exciting pledges from countries around the world to try to keep the climate from increasing in temperature to more than 1.8 degrees Celsius. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So what you're seeing at the Climate Change Summit here in Glasgow is that countries are coming together and they are trying to set their own individual ambition. We call ambition at home, we call them goals or targets. And so they're trying to set their own individual ambitions. And there's a lot of pressure. You know, I think one of the things that we're seeing at this COP26 that is apparently different than other COP and climate change accords has been that so many members of the private sector are joining us. And I think having, you know, in order to keep, we actually say 1.5 alive, you know, we want to keep it under 2, but we want to try to get that 1.5. We're going to need everybody in. And so it's great to see all of the private sector, the businesses that are coming out saying, how do we do this? There's a lot of exchange of ideas on what do we need to do for clean energy. Wind is especially interesting for California because we have not invested a lot in wind energy previously. There's a lot going on around the global equity piece, you know, ensuring that the countries who have created the least amount of emissions have a path to clean energy. And so they don't go for the cheaper kind of coal and fossil fuel based energy sources. So you're seeing a lot of that. And I think what's important probably to remember is while the countries set their ambition levels, it's states like California that actually implement them.
Well, I'm glad you made that point, because I think that's the trouble is we hear so much about countries. This is an international global problem. And so countries are all making pledges. But when it comes down to it, it seems to be more at the local level that perhaps the solutions are going to have to really be enforced. So does it appear to you that California is, you know, ahead of the pack, or where does California fall in the general sort of global attempts to reach, to keep the climate change from warming?
Yes. So California is one of those leaders. So I just came out of a panel where we were talking about how do we get to net zero, right? That's one of the goals, is to get to net zero emissions. And so when we think about that, people are asking California, well, how did you do this? How did you do cap and trade? What are you doing with wind? How are you decommissioning the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant? They're asking how to do this. So I think that really shows California is leading the nation, and the California is leading the world on, you know, reducing our emissions. And we have way more to go to, you know, combat what we're already seeing as the climate crisis in California. You mentioned it: wildfires, droughts, sea level rise, extreme heat. People forget, you know, when the planet warms, a lot of places, like I think about places in Vista, don't have air conditioning. That's not something they have. So how are we going to build cooling centers? How are we going to do that without emitting more emissions? So it's people really looking to California. So it's great as a subnational entity to be here. And I think that's why you see such a large delegation from California.
Yes, I saw you were quoted in the San Diego Union Tribune as mentioning this issue about people not having air conditioning in our district here in North County. And I got to ask you, how are we going to do that without adding to the problem? Because, of course, more air conditioning means possibly more emissions.
Yes, I mean, and you think about it, and you think about it in terms of the climate crisis, and you think about heat. So you think about places and housing. Where are we housing people now that will be unsustainable in 50 years? And usually you build a building for about 100-year lifetime. So we do need to tackle that. And that's an area where we haven't really started yet. And so I believe there's going to be an announcement later this week, maybe early next week, from our chair of natural resources in the Assembly on what we should do about extreme heat. And so I think, we are in California continuing to lead on the issues around climate, and that means tackling the whole spectrum, not kind of things that affect just the coast, like sea level rise.
Mm. It's interesting because it sounds like what people are discussing now is not just how to prevent the temperature from rising, but also what to do, bearing in mind that it really is going to rise. In other words, preparing for disasters more. I mean, how much is that taking up time in your meetings now, looking at really how to protect against emergency disasters as opposed to trying to prevent this from happening?
Well, so I think there's a two-pronged approach. One is mitigation. And the best thing we could do to prevent sea level rise, to reduce the effects of extreme heat, to reduce wildfires in the future, is to reduce emissions. So there's mitigation, right? And then there's adaptation, and that's a very big thing, a big theme here. Adaptation is how do we adapt to a changing climate, and that goes to where we build housing. Do we build it right on the coast? Do we build it inland? Those are some really tough conversations you can imagine that are facing the world. But California, we tackle those tough problems head on, and so you're going to probably see in this next year and then the following session a lot of different things around climate crisis, not just kind of the focus that I think we've had previously around drought, wildfires, and sea level rise, but extreme heat. And extreme heat will reduce air quality standards and decrease lifespans and cause death among our residents here in California. And I think as an elected, one of the things I think we should do is try to prevent people from dying. And so that's going to be some tough things that we're going to have to tackle. So there's mitigation, and then there's also adaptation.
I really can sense the earnestness, the severity of the situation, that presumably you are really getting a strong dose of that at this conference.
Oh, absolutely. I think, it doesn't matter what panel you go into, there's a hope. And I think, what's interesting is California, because we are this kind of US leader in the climate crisis, addressing the climate crisis, as well as a global leader in addressing the climate crisis, people are looking to us for hope. And I think there was a quote I heard from John Kerry at a panel yesterday. He's the presidential special envoy on climate. And he said, if you have despair and you have doubt, you have to look no further than the leadership of California. And I think that was echoed by our lieutenant governor in the last couple of days at the various panels that we've had. Eleni Kounalakis was out here repeating that, because we are in California leading. And, there's more to do. Obviously, I think that when people say, California is leading, and then you can point to 20 things that we have to do more, well, we've already done the first 20 things, and then there's going to be the next 20 things, and then there's going to be the next 20 things. Because if we don't do it now, we're facing a worldwide crisis.
So I want to get even more local than California, down to our district here in North County. Yes. When you look at the 5 cities in your district, we heard recently that, I think it was just yesterday, a mayor said it's actually at the city level that a lot of these measures are going to have to be taken. When you look at the 5 cities in your district, the 76, what are the cities that are actually taking some of the most important steps that we all have to start doing?
Yes, as somebody who comes from local government, I can say absolutely you need all levels of government working. As I said, it's going to take everybody all in to address the climate crisis. And so we need it at the local level, we need it at the school level, we need it at the cities, we need it at the state, we need it at the country, and we need it globally. And so that's kind of what this is all about here. And so when we look at it, I think, Encinitas has done a great job with going forward, looking at combating sea level rise. I used to sit on that committee. Encinitas and Carlsbad have gone to a CCA, pledging higher degrees of renewable energy. You see that blending in with the county level, where they're redoing their climate plan, which is long overdue at the county level. So I'm very happy to see that happen. And at the state level is where a lot of the energy policy gets set. And so you're seeing all levels of government going. I know Vista's making progress and Oceanside's making progress on their climate action plans. And I think it's really important to hold cities accountable, and for residents, anybody who has a child, anybody who has a neighboring kid, a niece, a nephew, needs to be going to the city councils demanding action to address the climate crisis and ensuring that we're reducing emissions where we can. I was really happy to see, I think last week or the week before, NCTD, North County Transit District, put out a survey to parents. Would they use these electric vehicle flex shuttles to help get their kids to and from school? And that's really important, because if you imagine an on-demand shuttle that replaces the needs for school districts to replace busing, and that's electric, it's fantastic. And you're seeing auto manufacturers committing, and I think Audi, I was on a panel, and Audi's committing that they're not going to design any more combustion engine cars after 2025. So you're seeing that the fleets are changing. You're seeing that there's a push to net zero. And so I was really happy because, when I first got elected to the Assembly, I did go to NCTD, and it was an initiative that I had with them. And I'm happy to see that going forward. I think the pandemic, caused a lot of things to be put on pause. And now when kids are back in school, we're seeing them move forward. And it's going to take all the little things, every agency, every water agency, every wastewater district, every transit district, the counties, the cities, it's going to take everybody. And so I see, every city's on their different path. They have their different way. That's why we have different cities. But I see all of them making steady progress towards, really realizing that the climate crisis is here, and we need to mitigate and we need to adapt.
Along those lines, I know that the San Diego Association of Governments is proposing a plan that would say all public transit, like buses and the trains, would be free. And then there would be a tax on people driving cars, which I know some people are very much up in arms against, especially in North County. We have some politicians who really don't like that idea. How important do you think it is that people start to shift their attitudes to policies like that?
So I think you probably have looked at my voting records. I very rarely vote for taxes. And I don't take positions on ballot measures, so I'm going to leave that one aside. But I will talk about the issue that we have in North County. And I don't think it's a partisan issue. It's a real person issue. Try to get from A to B on public transit. It is nearly impossible. That's why I approached NCTD about this, the school shuttle bus pilot, which would take kids from neighborhood stops to a public stop near their schools, because then you're creating a whole generation who are used to riding public transit. And I think a lot of people in North County, because we haven't had really functioning public transit, let's be honest, I can't get from my house to my district office on a regular basis with public transit. It's faster for me to use an e-bike. And so I think we're going to have to take all sorts of different transit options. And I think there's a lot of work. I would hope our local mayors, regardless of their party affiliation, would invest in expanding access to public transit, because you can't just say we don't have it, therefore we don't want it. I think you have to say we need it, and how are we going to get it? And then I absolutely support all youth having free transit passes. It's always been something I support. It is something I've worked really hard on, because again, you're creating a generation of ridership, and those are game changers, right? And so very excited about that. I also got $10 million in this last year's state budget for e-bike rebates for lower income folks. So because I ride an e-bike and I can afford it, but not everybody can afford it. And, we need to have safe e-bike riding. Please wear your helmets. If you're going to go out at night, make sure you have your lights. Make sure you're wearing I wear a safety vest often when I go out at night. If I'm taking my e-bike out, follow the rules, follow the traffic rules. Make sure you review the traffic rules with your children. Sorry, I had to do my little e-bike PSA there, Allison. But those are all things that get people out of their cars. But you have to make it so that people choose to get out of their cars. And if you can't get from A to B, people aren't going to choose to get out of their cars. So I understand some of the contention, but I think the plan really needs to be not that it doesn't work and therefore we don't agree. I would say the approach that I would hope all the mayors would take is, okay, it doesn't work, so how are we going to fix it?
Yeah, cars are obviously one of the big sources of CO2. The other idea is generating our energy in more sustainable ways, right? And you mentioned earlier that a couple of the cities have decided to join community choice energy, which would increase the amount of sustainable energy that we're all consuming as opposed to more fossil fuels. But some of the cities in your district haven't yet signed on. I mean, do you feel like that's a problem?
I feel everybody has their different timeline for getting there. I think, Encinitas is a leader, and Carlsbad has also been a leader in making that change. And I think Vista and Oceanside are still reviewing how they want to get there. And they now have two options of which ones to join. And so I'm hoping they're going to do that. But we're going to need to do more investment in energy. I think we have to go beyond CCAs. We have to really look at how do we incentivize and help fund offshore wind energy. And that, that's it. We haven't even started really to do the environmental analysis. So I want to put that let's table that for a while. I had some colleagues that were just in Portugal and they were looking at the offshore wind there. When I used to live in Germany, they had offshore wind there. It's a great source and you get wind at night, which is one of our things with the reliability of the grid is that solar is during the day. So if you're just doing solar, then you have to invest in a lot of battery storage, which we absolutely have to do because you have to do something when when the sun's not out and the wind's not blowing, you have to make sure you're still getting energy. And so, I was on a panel yesterday with Southern California Edison, and they're really, they're taking this on. It's how do we get there? How do we work and how do we partner with different organizations so we're getting to that net zero goal?
Are there any things that you're hearing, talking to other people from local areas that you think, yes, I could take that idea back to North County and push for this? I mean, is there anything that you feel like is new to you, or are you sort of so much ahead of the game that California is really telling everybody else what to do?
Well, it's day 2, or it's today, Thursday, so it's day 3 today. I'm going to be attending a panel on blue carbon this afternoon or this evening, and I think that's really interesting. We do know that salt marshes sequester more carbon than trees. And so that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to is how do we, focus and invest on salt marshes? Because if you take the Buena Vista Lagoon.
Yeah.
That lagoon needs to be restored. If you can make that a carbon sink, that is phenomenal. So I'm really looking forward to that panel and seeing what other areas, what other regions have done more on blue carbon than California has. We're just starting. The Port of San Diego is actually a leader in California and the United States on blue carbon, but it's still, we have so much to go. So I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited about learning about how other countries are doing their financing. If you look at sea level rise, we have an estimate of about $300 billion of public infrastructure that's going to be affected by sea level rise by 2100. That's $300 billion. And we put billions of dollars in this last year's budget. And that is important, and we need to do that. It's our down payment on the future, but we have so much more to do. And then, when I look at it, the other area where I think we struggle with is really how do we transition jobs from the fossil fuel industry to clean tech energy? You can't tell somebody that's making $100 an hour on an oil rig, okay, you're going to now have a job installing solar for $15 an hour. That's not just, that's not fair. It's never going to happen if we do that. So we really have to tackle that. And so, I'm also looking forward to hearing from other countries that have more desertification, how they're addressing extreme heat. What are they doing to have a net zero, plan for extreme heat? Because as you said, implying more air conditioning, that has its own set of emissions and that has its own set of energy usages. So how do we address that? So there's a lot to learn. I don't think we're the only ones providing best practices. I think there's a lot to learn. There are other states doing really well too. And so there's a couple panels in the next couple of days looking at what other states have done.
Does it strike you that there are jobs in North County that you see we need to be expanding and others that we need to be phasing out, just in terms of, getting really local here?
Yeah, so if we keep it local, I'd say we don't have a lot of fossil fuel industry jobs. That's not something we have in North County, so I don't think there's a necessity here. What I'm seeing is that the jobs are going to transition to clean energy, and we want to make sure that we are clean energy leaders. And so one of the things I do worry about is the expansion of the electric vehicle fast charging network. If it were up to me, I would put a couple fast chargers on every single park and ride in the state and say, go, drive your EVs. But we know range anxiety is still a problem. We're developing a secondary EV car market, and so that's really good. We put more money in the clean vehicle rebate program so people can help finance and buy electric vehicles. But we need to make sure, if you live in an apartment, it's almost impossible to have an electric vehicle because you go home and you're not going to be charging. If you have a spot somewhere that is not an EV charger, that's not very practical. So I think some of the things really I hope to work with my cities on how do we change this? How do we get more EV fast charging stations? How do we get more EVs retrofitted into multifamily unit apartment complexes? Because I think those are going to be some of the game changers we honestly need to do to address it locally.
And finally, in the minute that we have left, I know that almost everybody in that delegation from California are Democrats, and the Pew research recently showed that 90% of Republicans don't think climate change is a priority. So I wondered if you think that there's, you're obviously full of energy and you've got a lot of ideas, but do you see that we have the political makeup in order to do what needs to be done, especially here in San Diego County?
Absolutely. I would say, in North County, I'm very fortunate that my Republicans are by and large environmentalists. And so I think when I go out and I talk to people, before the program started, we were chatting a little bit and you said, you see me everywhere. We chat with everybody when we go out. We help everybody, regardless of party affiliation. And so when I go out and talk, I remember when I first got elected to the state assembly, I was at a reception and a Republican water board member came up to me. He said, Assemblymember, I am one of the most conservative Republicans you're going to ever find, but I want to thank you for co-authoring the plastics recycling bill. I have been saying for years that we need to have recycling facilities in California here where we create good jobs and we recycle it ourselves. And so I think that just is a testament to the fact that addressing the climate crisis and creating good clean energy jobs is not a partisan issue in my district.
Well, Assemblywoman Tasha Boerner Horvath, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Allison.
And thank you for joining us here on the KOCT Roundtable. I'm Allison St. John, and I hope that this has really revved you up and gotten you excited about the things that we are going to be doing about climate change in the future. Thank you.